A secret Mrs. Maclean shared too freely begins to ripple through Loch Dhu, leaving Hamish Macbeth to pick through whispers and consequences. In this village, loose tongues can be just as dangerous as sharp knives. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you enjoy settling into these Highland mysteries, subscribe and make this part of your nightly ritual. Only 11% are subscribed, while 89% aren't. Your support truly means a lot. The morning had gone wrong before Hamish even stepped inside Patel's shop. The wind pushed at the door as though trying to shove him back out again, and lugs trotted in ahead of him, ears pricked. The place was packed. Crofters stood about in damp jackets, pretending to look at tins on the shelves while listening hard. Patel clattered the kettle behind the counter with more force than needed. Hamish felt at once the stiff, too-quiet air that meant trouble had already begun. Mrs. Flora Maclean was in the middle of the floor, her round face flushed. Donny Kennedy stood opposite her, shaking with anger. His boots were caked with old mud, and the lace on one hung loose like a snapped shoelace on a child's plimsoll. He jabbed a finger at her. "Who told ye I'm not my father's son?" he shouted. Mrs. Maclean lifted her chin. "I've the minister's own letter, found in the vestry, written plain as daylight." "It'll be daylight in hell before I take that from you," Donny snapped back. Tourists near the biscuit shelf watched with bright interest, as though they had paid for a show. Hamish felt a slow heat crawl up his neck. Lugs gave a low whine, picking up the tension long before the humans would. "Enough," Hamish said. "You're making an exhibition of yourselves." No one listened. They spilled out into the street, Donny pushing the door open so hard it struck Hamish's shoulder. Hamish followed them out and wished he hadn't. The row continued on the pavement, loud enough to wake the manse hens. "I saw it with my own eyes," Mrs. Maclean said. "The minister wrote that the late laird had a child here, a boy. That's you, Donny Kennedy, whether you like it or not." "You couldn't read half the words if they were lit up," Donny said. "You're making up trouble." "I could read the important bits," she snapped, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Hamish noticed it, but only in passing. He was already annoyed and wanted to get back inside. He muttered, "A bit of gossip blown out of proportion," but Donny turned on him at once. "You're meant to be the police," Donny said. "Do something." "About what?" Hamish asked. "Folk shouting nonsense in the cold. Go home before you freeze your tongues off." Mrs. Maclean puffed up again. "You should look at that letter, Hamish Macbeth. Proper old handwriting. The minister knew more than folk think." "I've real work," Hamish said. "I'm not running about after half-burned parish rubbish." That drew a sharp look from Patel, who had stepped out to watch. Patel raised his brows in a small warning, as though to say that some rubbish mattered more than others. Hamish ignored it. He knew when someone wanted him to poke his nose in for village entertainment. But Donny had already stormed off, boots thudding down the road. A few crofters followed after him, whispering. Mrs. Maclean stood on the pavement, breathing hard. Someone from the post office leaned out the door and asked what she had found. She launched into the tale again, louder this time, adding details she hadn't mentioned a minute earlier. Hamish felt the gossip stretch its wings. It would fly through Loch Dhu now, faster than he could stop it. Lugs nudged his knee, uneasy. Back inside the shop, the tourists were whispering about heirs and lost fortunes. Patel poured Hamish a mug of tea with a sigh. "You should go see that letter," Patel said, "before half the Highlands hears what folk think it says." Hamish blew on his tea. "It's smudged. She said so herself. She couldn't read every word." "That won't stop folk believing it," Hamish shrugged. "Folk will believe whatever suits them." Patel gave him another pointed look. Hamish took it as more meddling and turned away. He had no patience for it that morning. He told himself the whole thing would settle once Donny cooled down. But a crofter standing by the fruit crate muttered that if Donny truly was the laird's son, then land might change hands. Another man muttered the opposite. Someone else said the late laird had always had an eye for the village girls. Mrs. Maclean, now warmed by attention, chimed in with more hints. Hamish set down his tea untouched. Too much talk, too many eager faces. It was the kind of nonsense that grew legs and teeth. He stepped outside again and saw villagers in doorways talking already. Lines were being drawn with pointed glances and folded arms. Donny's mother, a thin woman with a face like wet stone, strode down the road demanding to know who had said what. No one answered her directly, but eyes flicked toward Mrs. Maclean. Hamish rubbed the bridge of his nose. all this over a letter that might not say anything at all. Lugs pressed against his leg. The dog's ears were flat, watching every movement on the street. "You're as bad as the rest," Hamish told him, though his voice was softer. Another crofter approached Hamish and said, too politely, "You'll sort this, won't you, officer? Can't have folk thinking our land belongs to someone else." Hamish felt the pinch of responsibility he'd hoped to avoid. "I'll look into it," he lied, mostly to get away. The man didn't look satisfied, but he stepped back. Already the blame for whatever happened next was being laid gently at Hamish's feet. By noon, half the village had chosen sides without knowing what they believed. Mrs. Maclean, flushed with importance, repeated her claims until even she seemed unsure what she had seen. Donny kept to the road outside Patel's, daring anyone to contradict him. Tourists lingered to listen. It was becoming a spectacle. Hamish watched it all from the station doorway with a feeling of sinking irritation. He should have walked straight to the Kirk vestry, taken whatever paper existed, and locked it away. Instead, he had treated it like one of the village's sillier feuds, something that would blow over. It was not blowing over. Lug sat beside him, tail still, eyes on the crowd. The air had that sharp, dangerous quietness that came when people decided they were right long before knowing the facts. Hamish felt it settle on the street like a thin frost. He muttered, "Fools, the lot of them," though he wasn't sure if he meant the villagers or himself. Behind him, the telephone began to ring. Another complaint, no doubt. He didn't hurry to answer it. Hamish knew trouble had reached its next stage the moment the telephone rang at the station, and Blair's furious voice burst down the line. Blair complained that villagers in Lochdu were raking up lairds and bastards, and that Hamish had better get that letter or stop the noise. Then the line went dead. Hamish stared at the receiver. Blair had managed in under 30 seconds to blame him for a problem he had not created and offer no help in solving it. That was Strathbane for you. He fetched his jacket. Lugs rose with a slow stretch, tail low, sensing the day sliding the wrong way. The dog followed him out as if expecting something unpleasant, which, knowing the village, was reasonable enough. Mrs. Flora Maclean lived in a squat council house that looked as though it had grown embarrassed by its own paint. The curtains firmed the scent of peat smoke until it clung to a visitor's hair. Hamish knocked once. The door opened at once, as though she had been standing behind it. "You took your time," she said, wide-eyed and pleased with herself. "Folk are saying you dinna care about the truth." Hamish stepped inside. "I care fine. Show me this famous letter." She beamed, waddled to a sideboard and pulled out a biscuit tin. It rattled as she opened it. She produced a half-burned sheet, edges blackened, middle mostly intact. "I only burned the edges," she said. "Couldn't risk someone else finding it first." "You're not supposed to burn any of it," Hamish said. "Evidence, Flora. You've heard the word." She ignored that. She thrust the page at him as if presenting a trophy. The handwriting was shaky. Ink blotches marred half the sentences. Hamish read it while she hovered beside him like a hen guarding a worm. The minister, long dead now, had written to a solicitor in Inverness saying something about a boy born to the late laird by a village girl. The minister thought the matter delicate and asked if the child might be helped. Hamish frowned. Parts of the page were missing entirely. The name of the child, if it had ever been written, had vanished with the burned corner. Mrs. Maclean watched his face keenly. "It's Donny," she said. "Of course it is." "You dinna know that," Hamish said. "Half this is gone." "The dates fit," she insisted. "The laird was wild in those days. Everyone knew it." Hamish did not bother to argue. He had lived long enough in Lochdu to know a woman who wanted a mystery to have a certain answer would never let logic near it. He handed the page back. She clutched it to her chest. "Folk should ken the truth. A lad deserves his due." Her voice had a rehearsed quality. Hamish noticed the tin was too full for one page. "What else is in there?" "Just scraps," she said too quickly. She shut the lid. "Nothing important." Lugs whined, and Hamish felt the shift in the room before he heard the footsteps outside. The door flew open without a knock. Donny's mother stood there, face white with fury. Her thin coat trembled on her shoulders. "You filthy woman," she said to Mrs. Maclean. "You'll ruin my boy with your mouth." Mrs. Maclean jerked upright. "He has a right to his blood. If the laird—" "Don't you dare say that name," the mother snapped. She turned to Hamish. "I want her charged. Slander, lies, whatever you call it." Hamish lifted his hands. "There's no crime in finding an old letter." There is when she twists it, the mother shot back. Mrs. Maclean gave a shrill laugh. Twist? I read it plain. The minister wrote. You cannae read plain, the mother interrupted. Half the village knows it. Mrs. Maclean flushed scarlet. I read enough. The two women launched into a shouting match, each trying to talk over the other. Hamish stepped between them and felt foolish for it. He raised his voice just enough. Stop it, both of you. They paused, but only to glare at each other. The air in the room thickened until even Lugs backed behind Hamish's legs. Hamish said, Listen, the letter's not clear. The name's missing. It could be any boy. It's him, Mrs. Maclean said. Who else? Hamish turned to the mother. I can check its origin, that's all. You should take it, she said, before she burns the rest. Mrs. Maclean clapped a hand over the biscuit tin. I'm keeping it safe, safe. Hamish almost snorted. Her idea of safety involved matches and gossip. He was about to insist on taking the letter when the telephone rang in her hallway. She moved to answer it, but he reached it first. Colonel Halberton Smythe's clipped voice filled Hamish's ear. Macbeth, what is this nonsense about an heir? My solicitor is demanding to see documents. This Wilney blow-over man. I'm looking into it, Hamish said. You'd better, the colonel replied, and hung up without a farewell. Hamish replaced the receiver and found both women staring at him with different kinds of expectation. He felt pinched from both sides. The colonel's anger was one thing, but it was Mrs. Maclean's smugness that irritated him more. He said, Flora, is this the only letter? There might have been another page once, she said. I didn't see it. The mother barked a laugh. She sees what suits her. Mrs. Maclean drew herself up. I copied some lines into my exercise book for safety, she said. But that's private. Hamish stiffened. Let me see it. No. She hugged the biscuit tin to her chest like a child clutching a toy. Folk twist things. I'm not letting this out of my hands. The mother pointed at her. You'll twist it. That's what you do. Hamish felt the headache forming. He was no closer to the truth. He only knew now that Flora Maclean had more than one version of the letter. That alone was a clue, though he wished it weren't. He turned to the mother. Go home for now. Let me get this sorted. She left with a last glare at Mrs. Maclean, slamming the door on her way out. Mrs. Maclean sagged into a chair, trembling, but he did not trust the trembling. He'd seen her 2 lively minutes before. She waved the page at him again. You see? The child lives by the loch. Who else is it? Donny was born right here. Plenty of folk live by the loch, Hamish said. Half the village. You're being difficult, Hamish Macbeth. He sighed. He did not like being told what he was, least of all by Flora Maclean. Let me take the letter, he said. No, she said firmly. Folk would only hide it. I'm keeping it till things are settled. That's not how this works, he said. It's how it works for me, she answered. He looked at her hands gripping the paper. He could have taken it by force, but that would spark a week of righteous outrage. Lochdu excelled at that sort of thing. He let his hand drop. Fine, but you keep it where I can find you. She brightened again, foolishly pleased by his reluctance. I knew you'd see sense. He didn't see sense. He saw trouble that would tangle itself around the whole village before he got a proper look at the truth. He stepped outside. The cold air hit him like a bucket of water. Lugs nudged his hand, as if asking why humans made life so complicated. Hamish said, because they're idiots, and locked the thought in his head so he wouldn't have to explain it. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Maclean shutting her door, no doubt ready to tell the story 10 different ways to the next person who asked. The missing name on the page gnawed at him. The minister had written only, the child now living by the loch. That could mean anyone, and her exercise book, held tight, suggested she knew more or less than she was saying. He set off toward the station, no solution in sight, only the tightening sense that he'd need to choose whom to anger first. In Lochdu, that was never an easy choice. By the next morning, Lochdu had turned sour. Hamish knew it the moment he opened the station door and heard raised voices drifting up from the road. Lugg slipped out first, ears flat. Hamish followed and saw Donny Kennedy marching up and down outside Patel's, waving his arms like a man trying to flag down disaster. It's my inheritance, Donny shouted at no one in particular. My land. Folk have cheated me long enough. A pair of tourists stopped to stare. Patel stood in his doorway, wearing the pained expression of a shopkeeper watching customers drift away from the commotion. When Hamish approached, Donny puffed out his chest as if Hamish were an audience he'd booked. "You'll sort this, Macbeth," Donny said loudly. "Folk will not treat me like dirt any more. I'll see a solicitor, Inverness, maybe further." Hamish thought Donny looked half scared beneath the bluster, but the man was too busy yelling to notice his own nerves. Behind him stood Mrs. Flora Maclean, nodding like an obedient hen as Donny repeated her words back at her. "It's written clear," she said. "The minister said the laird had a son here. Who else would it be?" Hamish said, "You had half a page, half," and smudged at that. "I ken enough," she snapped. "More than some." A few crofters drifted near, watching Hamish as though waiting for him to declare Donny the new laird on the spot. Their eyes were expectant, hungry, resentful. All at once he felt like the last adult in a room full of bickering children. He said, "Everyone calm down. There's nothing decided." This earned him a low mutter from old Fergus MacNeil, who spat in the road and said, "I've maybe been paying rent to the wrong folk my whole life." "That'll be the day," someone else grumbled. Lugs pressed against Hamish's leg, whining. He had good instincts for the mood of Lochdu, and the mood was bad. Before Hamish could haul Donny aside for a quiet word, Mrs. Patel hurried up and said breathlessly, "There's a meeting. Kirk Hall. Now. They're wanting you there. They say you're avoiding it." "I've been awake 5 minutes," Hamish said. But she had already scurried off, leaving him standing like a man caught loitering outside his own duties. He sighed. If they wanted a spectacle, they would get one. The Kirk Hall was stuffy, the air thick with peat smoke clinging to damp coats. Crofters crowded around a trestle table covered in yellowed maps of the old boundaries. Someone had drawn new lines in pencil that looked optimistic at best and greedy at worst. Voices rose in snatches. "Always said the Kennedy Croft should have been bigger." "Aye, but the laird wouldn't leave it to him without reason. She says it plain as day, the letter does." When Hamish entered, the noise dipped but did not stop. He made his way to the front, trying not to trip over a fold-up chair. Donny stood near the maps, flushed and breathing hard. Mrs. Maclean sat primly in the front row, hands folded over her handbag like a Sunday saint. She looked far too pleased with herself for a woman who had set the village on fire with a scrap of scorched paper. "Right," Hamish said. "Let's keep this civil." No one did. "I've been cheated," Donny announced, "all my life. And now I ken the truth. I'll be going to a solicitor in Inverness tomorrow." A ripple of whispers moved through the hall. Someone coughed. Someone else snorted. Donny mistook the reaction for support and puffed out his chest. Mrs. Maclean raised her voice. "The minister wrote that the laird fathered a boy by a village girl. And who lived by the loch at that time? Donny. It fits." Hamish rubbed the side of his nose. "Flora, you've only the first half of it. There's no name. It could be anyone." She glared at him. "I read enough." "I'm sure you did," he said dryly. Before Donny could launch into another speech, the Kirk Hall door opened with a creak sharp enough to cut through the murmuring. Priscilla Halberton Smythe stepped inside in a pale coat that made the room seem dingier than it was. Every villager straightened at once. Some even stood. Hamish felt a familiar tightness in his stomach. He wished she hadn't come. Priscilla walked down the aisle with that cool, unreadable expression she carried like armour. She looked at Hamish, not unkindly, not kindly either, just long enough to make him feel as though he had been caught doing something improper. "Hamish," she said in a low voice, "why didn't you go for the letter immediately?" "I had other things," he muttered. "Other things," she repeated, and it sounded like a verdict. "You left it lying in a biscuit tin." "It was evidence," he said defensively, though he knew how it sounded. "I wasn't about to fight her for it." "You might have tried." Her tone was mild, but the hall heard her well enough. Hamish felt his face heat. Even Donny looked amused. He cleared his throat. "We don't ken yet what the letter actually means. Folk need to stop imagining fortunes where none exist." A crofter near the back raised his hand like a schoolboy. "I saw someone by the Kirk vestry last night," he said. "A man from away. City coat. Could have been the solicitor come early." Hamish turned sharply. "What man?" "Didn't he get a good look?" the crofter said. "Tall, dark coat, walking fast, not one of ours." "It's nothing," another crofter said quickly. "Folk pass through all the time." Which was a lie. In Lochdu, strangers were stared at until they fled. Hamish narrowed his eyes. He had the feeling the man knew more than he wanted to say. Before he could press the point, the trestle table rattled, Donnie had slammed his hand on it. "You're all pretending I'm imagining things," he shouted, "but I'll not be bullied. If the laird had a son, I've a right to everything he denied me." A younger crofter, broad-shouldered with a face like a boiled potato, stepped forward. "You think you're special because Flora says so? You think the rest of us will bow?" Donnie shoved him. The crofter shoved back, chairs scraped. Hamish threw himself between them and got an elbow in the ribs for his trouble. "Stop it," Hamish snapped. "Both of you sit down." They did, but only after several seconds of glaring. Priscilla watched with a faint frown, as though observing schoolchildren fighting over a broken pencil. Mrs. Maclean rose again, voice carrying too eagerly. "Donnie deserves what's his. I'm only telling the truth." "Your truth shifts every 5 minutes," Hamish muttered. "What was that?" she asked sharply. "Nothing helpful," he said. More muttering, more eyes on him. He felt like a sack tied in the middle and pulled from both ends. At last, after too much shouting and no agreement, the meeting sagged to an exhausted halt. No one had changed their mind. Instead, they had simply found new ways to dislike each other. Donnie stormed out first, promising loudly that lawyers would settle everything. Mrs. Maclean followed, stopping at the doorway to give Hamish a triumphant nod that made his teeth clench. The crofters left in small clusters, each group speaking in low, suspicious tones. Priscilla lingered only a moment. "You've lost control of this," she said quietly. "I never had control," he answered. She gave a small nod, almost like agreement, then turned and left with the grace of someone who never had to live with the consequences of village quarrels. The hall emptied. The maps on the trestle table fluttered in a faint draught from the open door, as though waving at him in mock sympathy. Hamish stared at them, wishing he could fold the whole business away as easily. He gathered the maps clumsily, knocking over a stack of hymnals. One clattered to the floor. The noise echoed too loudly in the now empty space. Lugs padded up beside him, ears low. The dog gave a soft, uneasy whine. "Aye," Hamish said, "it's a mess." The crofter's comment about a stranger in a city coat lingered in his mind. It might be nothing. It might be something. But he had been too busy wrestling Donnie away from a fistfight to follow up on it. He left the Kirk Hall with no decision made, no peace restored, and no progress except deeper suspicion from every side. Lochdu had turned itself into a courtroom, but no one wanted a judge. They wanted a verdict that suited their grievance. Outside, mist drifted across the road, thin and cold. Hamish stood there a moment, shoulders stiff, watching Donnie's distant figure carry on shouting to anyone who would listen. There would be no quieting the village now. The banging on the station door was too loud for the hour. Hamish had barely dragged on his shirt when it came again, followed by a boy's shrill voice shouting his name. Lugs paced and whined, already braced for something unpleasant. Hamish opened the door and found wee Jamie Campbell, breathless and wild-eyed. "It's Donnie," the boy gasped. "His boat's drifting. Folk think. Just come quick." The child ran off before Hamish could answer. He grabbed his coat and strode out, Lugs trotting beside him. A knot of villagers stood at the shore, shadows against the dull water. Someone pointed at the loch. A small boat drifted crookedly near the jetty, bumping the posts with soft, repeated taps that grated on Hamish's nerves. A crofter named Murdo was already climbing into Hamish's police dinghy, muttering that he did nay like the look of it. Hamish pushed them out, the oars thudding against the rowlocks. The cold bit at his hands. Lugs barked from the shore, a thin, anxious sound. As they drew closer, the shape in the boat sharpened. Donnie Kennedy lay slumped on the bottom boards, arms limp. His jacket clung wet to him, but his boots, Hamish noted it at once, looked dry as old stone. Murdo swore under his breath. "Och, lad." Hamish hauled himself aboard Donnie's boat. His fingers brushed the cold skin of the man's wrist. No pulse. Donnie's head lolled against the gunwale. A whiskey bottle rolled gently with the movement of the boat, clinking against the boards. Hamish swallowed hard. "Help me get him in." By the time they reached the shore, a crowd had gathered. Too large, too curious. Villagers stared with an odd mixture of pity and eager interest, as though tragedy was something to be shared out evenly. Lug stood stiff as a board, ears back, growling low at the boat as though it had done something wicked. Then a car screeched to a stop on the road. Blair got out, slamming the door hard enough to make the tourists flinch. He strode down the bank, face flushed with importance. "So," Blair said loudly, Drunk and drowned, easy, saves us time. Hamish ignored him and looked again at Donnie's boots. Not a drop of lock water on the leather. Laces neat. His clothes soaked, but not his footwear. None of it made sense. He didn't fall in, Hamish murmured. Blair turned. What's that, Macbeth? His boots. They're dry. Blair barked a laugh. Aye, maybe a water sprite carried him in. He rode out, drank himself senseless, toppled over, and clawed back in before dying. Happens all the time. It doesn't, Hamish said. And the mooring rope. Don't start, Blair cut in. You'll not waste my morning with daft theories. You village constables see ghosts in shadows and call it cleverness. He turned to Tam Souter, Donnie's occasional drinking companion, dragging him forward by the sleeve. What fight did you have with him last night, eh? Tam went pale. Fight? None. We had a couple drams and that was it. Ask Patel. We parted outside his shop. Donnie was fine, sober enough. Sober, Blair repeated with a sneer. And now dead. Explain that. I can't, Tam cried. Folk die. It's not always murder. Blair puffed up like a crowing rooster. Aye, well, we'll see about that. A tourist couple whispered nearby. The woman said, I thought the Highlands were peaceful. The man nodded, eyes wide, storing the moment away as to something to tell people back home. Patel, standing behind them, winced as though each word docked a pound from his weekly takings. Hamish crouched beside the boat again, ignoring Blair's bluster. There was a scrape along the side, fresh enough to show pale wood beneath the paint. The mooring rope hung in tatters, not frayed by age, but cut. A clean slice near the knot. He touched it with a finger. Yes, cut. He stood slowly, but Blair stepped in front of him. Unless you can bring me a murderer on a silver plate, Macbeth, this is done. Drowned while drunk. End of story. His voice was loud enough for all of Lochdu to hear. Hamish kept his voice level. It's a bit early to be sure. You were always a soft lad, Blair said, grinning. Folk take advantage of you. This Kennedy fellow drank himself to death, and you're off imagining conspiracies. Hamish felt heat rise in his face. He hated giving Blair the reaction he wanted, but the man had a talent for it. Still, he knew better than to push when Blair was in one of his grandstanding moods. He stepped aside. People murmured. Some already eyed Tam as though Blair's accusation had soothed their need for someone to blame. Murdo muttered to another crofter, If Donnie drowned after all that talk of inheritance, then, well, maybe someone wanted him quiet. But when Hamish turned toward him, Murdo stiffened and said quickly, I didn't say anything. Typical Lochdu courage. Then Donnie's mother arrived, stumbling down the bank with a wail that was more anger than grief. I knew it, she cried. I told folk this would happen. You, she pointed a shaking finger at Mrs. Maclean, who hovered in the crowd. You and your filthy letter. You ruined him. Mrs. Maclean flushed, backing away. I only meant... You meant trouble, the mother snapped. The crowd leaned in, hungry for more. Blair's smirk widened. He loved a village tearing at itself. Hamish said gently, Mrs. Kennedy, please go home for now. Her eyes burned with accusation. You should have stopped all this yesterday. He said nothing. There was no answer that wouldn't make him look worse. Blair gestured at the body. Get him covered. We'll take him to Strathbane. And Macbeth, he grinned. Do try not to invent any wild tales on the way. Leave the thinking to real detectives. Hamish bit the inside of his cheek and did not respond. Lugs pressed against his leg, trembling with unease. When Donnie's body was carried up the bank, villagers followed, some whispering prayers, others whispering gossip. The boat rocked empty behind them, knocking softly against the jetty. Hamish lingered. The cut rope, the scrape, the dry boots, the whiskey bottle that looked too neatly placed. Nothing about it felt like a simple accident. But Blair had already hammered the official line into shape, and if Hamish pushed too hard now, Blair would only dig in further out of spite. He leaned on the railing a moment. Lugs whined, tail low. Aye, Hamish murmured. It's bad. Behind him, voices rose again. Anger, blame, fear. Lochdu had been divided over a letter, and now it had a death to sharpen its claws on. The wind shifted, carrying the loch's cold breath. Hamish felt a tightening in his chest. Something was wrong, and he was already letting the wrong people shape the story. Blair was waiting at the station when Hamish returned, as though the man had been glued to the chair for hours just to make a point. His bulk overflowed the seat, one finger tapping the desk with the steady irritation of someone denied his breakfast. "About time," Blair said. "We'll get this written up now. Misadventure, open and shut." Hamish shrugged out of his wet coat. Luggs shook himself hard, sending droplets across Blair's trouser leg. Blair glared at the dog as if Luggs had done it deliberately. "I had a look," Hamish said. "His boots were dry, and the mooring rope looked cut. I need it checked properly before we call it misadventure." "Boots," Blair scoffed. "He was drunk. Folk do stupid things when drunk. Write it down. Misadventure. I've better things to do than listen to Crofter's sob stories." Hamish sat at the desk, the paperwork spread before him like a punishment. He hated the forms. He hated the boxes, the lines, the expectation that a life could be squared off neatly. Blair stood over him like a jail warden. "Tick that," Blair ordered, "and that, and put the time here. Macbeth, stop dithering." Hamish felt the weight of exhaustion settling over him. His mind kept circling the scrape on the boat and the cut rope, but Blair's voice battered those thoughts aside. Hamish signed the report. It felt like pushing away something important. "There," Blair said, snatching the paper. "You see? Easy enough when you stop playing detective." He lumbered out, leaving the station colder for his presence. Luggs whined, nudging Hamish's knee as if trying to soften something that had already hardened. "It's done," Hamish muttered, though the words sat badly in his mouth. He had barely time to gather himself before he needed to face Donnie's mother. She lived in a draughty cottage near the shore, curtains drawn tight against prying eyes. Not that such a thing ever worked in Lochdu. News passed through the village walls like smoke. She opened the door without invitation. Her face looked older than yesterday, as though grief had scraped her raw. "Well?" she said. The word cut like a blade. Hamish cleared his throat. "It's been ruled an accident. A misadventure. I'm sorry." She stared at him, not with tears, not with rage at first, just a cold, hollow calculation, as though she were adding up every mistake he had ever made. "You let that woman ruin him," she said, her voice thin but sharp. "And now you call it an accident. You're not on our side at all." Luggs stepped forward, tail low, offering a small nuzzle to her hand. She pushed the dog away with a stiff gesture. "Take your beast out," she said. "I've nothing more to say." Hamish nodded and stepped back. She shut the door without a farewell. The sound echoed down the lane. He walked to Patel's shop because he needed tea and maybe silence, though Lochdu rarely offered either. The bell jingled as he entered, and the buzz of voices hit him at once. A young man near the counter was saying, "If Flora Maclean had kept her mouth shut, he'd still be alive. Folk like her ruin everything." Another crofter murmured agreement. Patel tried to hush them, but gossip had momentum. Hamish moved closer, and the young man noticed him. The lad flushed but didn't stop talking. "She starts blethering about letters and heirs and all that nonsense, and now Donnie's dead." "Watch your words," Patel said sharply, trying to steer the shop back into civility. But the damage was done. The room pulsed with resentment, each person adding their own version of the story. The tourists at the back pretended to study a postcard rack but leaned in nosily. Then the door opened again, and Mrs. Flora Maclean stepped inside. The shift in the room was instant. Voices cut off. A tin of biscuits clattered onto a shelf. Even the kettle seemed to pause its simmer. Mrs. Maclean, usually ruddy-faced and self-assured, looked pale, almost grey. "I'm only wanting," she began. "No one asked what you're wanting," someone muttered. Hamish felt the pressure of every eye in the shop. He had just signed off that Donnie died by his own foolishness. If he let the crowd tear into Mrs. Maclean, it would look as though her gossip had killed him, and Hamish, by ruling it an accident, had shielded her. "Hold your tongues," Hamish said. The words came out sharper than intended. Silence thickened. It was the wrong thing to say. It made him look like he was defending her. Mrs. Maclean blinked at him, confused by the lifeline she did not deserve. "I only wanted justice," she whispered. "Then keep quiet about it," Hamish said. It was meant to calm her, but it sounded like advice to a child too foolish to manage her own mess. Patel, trying again to restore normality, said, "Hamish, Donnie was here last night, behind the shop. I saw him pour whiskey from a bottle. Looked like he'd been at it a while." Hamish seized on it too quickly. "There you are. He was drinking. That supports the accident." Patel looked uneasy. "Aye, but he was steady on his feet. I didn't see him stumble." Still, the details stuck like a tack in Hamish's mind. Donnie had been drinking. That matched Blair's version. It made things easier. It made his signature on the form less of a betrayal. A woman near the window said, under her breath, "Convenient, isn't it? All wrapped up neat." Hamish ignored her. Mrs. Maclean stood rigid, clutching her handbag as though expecting someone to wrench it from her. No one spoke to her. No one even pretended politeness. Loch Dhu could be cruel when it wished. Hamish took a step toward the door. He needed out. His decision, his signing of Blair's line, had shaped the story before he understood the facts. Now the village was twisting around it, warping itself into new and worse shapes. He stepped outside. The cold air hit him like a reprimand. Lugs pressed close to his leg, shivering faintly with unease. "Aye," Hamish said softly, "we've made a mess of it." Somewhere behind him, the shop door opened again and voices rose, angry now, bitter and certain. The village had decided what had happened, and Hamish had helped them decide wrong. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he stepped out of the station and saw a strange car parked crookedly beside Patel's shop. It had Inverness plates and the sort of shine that never lasted long in Loch Dhu. A young woman leaned against it, scribbling in a notebook, while two villagers pretended not to watch her. Lugs gave a low growl, not at her but at the air around her, which had that sharpness of someone looking for trouble. She spotted Hamish at once and walked toward him with a brisk stride, the kind that said she never bothered waiting to be invited. "You're Constable Macbeth," she said. "Inverness Chronicle. I'm doing a piece on the boy who drowned after claiming to be the laird's heir." Hamish stiffened. He did nae claim it. Folk were talking nonsense. She raised an eyebrow. So a disputed letter surfaces, villagers shout about inheritance, and then the supposed heir dies in a drunken boating accident. That's tidy. Almost too tidy. "There was nothing tidy about it," Hamish said sharply. "It was an accident." "You sound very sure." She clicked her pen. "Convenient, don't you think?" Lugs pressed against Hamish's leg. The dog's unease mirrored his own. He felt a heat climb his neck at being questioned by a slip of a girl who knew nothing about Loch Dhu and even less about Donnie. "I've said what happened," he replied, "and that's all you'll get." She smiled as if she'd won something. "Villagers tell me different. They say the lake is shallow near the jetty. Hard to drown unless someone helps you along." "Villagers say plenty," Hamish muttered. "Most of it wrong." "Yet you ruled it misadventure." Her eyes glittered. "I wonder why." Hamish turned away before he said something foolish. She called after him, "I'll find out what's being hidden, Constable," which earned her 3 approving nods from townsfolk eager for drama. Patel caught Hamish by the sleeve as he passed. "She's been asking all sorts," he whispered. "Folks are telling her more than they should. You'll want to stop her printing something that brings every Gawker in Scotland here." "I cannae stop her printing anything," Hamish snapped more sharply than meant. Patel looked stung. Hamish sighed. "Sorry, it's been a long week." "Aye," Patel said, but the word carried no comfort. The reporter cornered Mrs. Maclean next, scribbling furiously as Flora babbled about the minister, the letter, fairness, and Donnie's rightful place. Hamish watched from a distance. Every sentence would only deepen the damage. He was saved from intervening by the ringing of the station phone. When he reached it, the voice on the line was Priscilla's, cool, clipped, and utterly without warmth. "Hamish, Father wishes to see you. Today. It concerns the letter and everything else." Hamish swallowed. "Must it be today?" "Yes," she said, "before matters get worse." Her tone suggested they already had. Tommel Castle looked particularly unfriendly when Hamish walked up the long drive. Its grey walls felt as cold as the Colonel's temper waiting inside. The drawing room smelled of polish and faint disapproval. The Colonel paced before the fireplace like a man preparing to court-martial his gardener. "This is what comes of letting gossip rule a village," he thundered. "Now reporters are sniffing around. I won't have my family's name dragged into Highland mud." Hamish said nothing. The Colonel was the sort of man who preferred shouting over answers. Priscilla stood by the window, arms crossed. She looked elegant and distant enough to make Hamish wish he had worn a better shirt. She said, "Hamish, why didn't you secure the letter when you first saw it? Leaving it in a biscuit tin was careless." Hamish felt his ears burn. "I didn't want to start a fight over an old scrap of paper." "You didn't want to," the Colonel echoed, incredulous. "Does Loch Dhu's constable pick his duties according to which old women he wishes not to offend?" Hamish bristled. "I was dealing with a death and a village at each other's throats." "Because you let them get that way," Priscilla said quietly. He winced. Coming from her, the words struck deeper than the Colonel's shouting. Hamish cleared his throat. "If I could see the family papers, only the ones from that time, it might help settle things. If the minister really wrote to your solicitor—" "There will be no rummaging through private documents," the Colonel snapped. "Absolutely not." Priscilla did not contradict him. She only looked at Hamish with a cool, unreadable expression. If she sympathized at all, she hid it well. Hamish felt himself growing taller in uselessness. It would settle matters quicker. He tried again. "No," the Colonel barked, "and that is final." Hamish stopped speaking. Pushing further would only humiliate him more. The Colonel poured himself a whiskey and drank it in one swallow. "You know, Macbeth, the old minister was a dramatic fool, wrote long letters about every little dispute. Most of them meant nothing. If he mentioned some child, it was probably some parish nonsense he made up to feel important." Hamish's head lifted slightly. "You're sure?" "Of course I'm sure," the Colonel said. "He was always sending letters off to solicitors and never following them up. Half of them never left his desk." That, Hamish realised, was a clue, but he kept his face blank. If the minister wrote letters that never reached their destination, then Mrs. Maclean's letter might never have been handled by any solicitor at all. The whole claim could rest on a scrap the minister never meant anyone to see. But he would not give Priscilla the satisfaction of seeing he'd learned something from her father's tantrum. Priscilla spoke again. "Hamish, villagers are saying Donny died because of this. Whatever the truth, it's feeding something ugly. You need to regain control." "I never had control," Hamish said, before he could stop himself. The Colonel snorted. "Then find it." Hamish stood, feeling lower than when he'd entered. Luggs, waiting by the door, looked relieved to see him moving at last. Priscilla walked him out, stopping before the steps. She studied him with that distant calm that always made him feel like a schoolboy caught daydreaming. "I know you mean well," she said, "but meaning well isn't enough just now." Hamish nodded, unable to trust his voice. She stepped back inside before he could reply. He trudged down the drive, Luggs at his side. The cold air bit through his coat, but he welcomed the sting. It felt honest. Behind him, Tommel Castle's windows glowed faintly, as though watching him leave. Ahead lay Loch Dhu, with its gossiping crofters, angry mothers, self-righteous Flora, a reporter sniffing around, and a dead man with dry boots. Between them all, Hamish felt like a thin thread stretched to snapping. He reached the village road again. The reporter stood there, notebook ready, waiting to feast on his humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, but he walked past without slowing. Luggs stayed close, tail tucked, mirroring the heaviness settling over him. Nothing was settled, nothing was clear. And now he had fewer allies than before, if he'd had any to begin with. Hamish reached the station door, hesitated, and looked back toward the loch. The water lay still, but he felt no calm from it, only unease. Tomorrow would be worse. A crash like a gunshot tore Hamish out of a thin, miserable sleep. Luggs leapt up first, barking at the door as though the whole village were collapsing. Then the telephone rang, shrill and frantic. Hamish grabbed the receiver. "It's Flora," came a neighbour's voice. "Someone smashed her window. She's screaming fit to wake the dead." Hamish groaned, dragged on his trousers and stepped outside. The night was sharp, the kind that made the loch air cut through wool. Luggs stayed close, ears high, tail stiff. Mrs. Maclean's house glowed oddly, lamplight spilling through a jagged hole in the front window. Glass glittered on the path like frost. A handful of neighbours stood in the lane, pretending they'd simply been passing by. Hamish pushed through them. "Anyone see what happened?" No one answered. Then a woman said loudly, "Folk get what they ask for," and folded her arms. When Hamish stared at her, she looked away, eyes blank. Inside, Flora Maclean sat hunched on the sofa under a blanket, hands shaking so hard she almost dropped the card she was clutching. A stone lay on the floor beside her, wrapped with twine. A scrap of cardboard was tied to it. Hamish lifted it. "Mouth shut would keep men alive." The letters were big and clumsy, as though someone had tried to disguise their hand and only made it uglier. Cold air gusted through the broken pane. "I never meant," Flora whispered. She repeated it like a stuck record. I never meant. Hamish suppressed the urge to snap. "Did you see who did it?" She shook her head, eyes darting toward the window as if expecting more stones. He examined the message again. It was the sort of threat Loch Dhu would produce when people grew tired of normal gossip. Someone had decided the village needed justice, and since Donny was now beyond reach, Flora would do. He stood. "I'll need to look around outside." "Don't leave me," she said and grabbed his sleeve. "Folk hate me now." "Folk hated you before," he muttered, more sharply than he meant. She recoiled as though slapped. He sighed. "I'll be right back." Outside, the neighbours shifted uneasily. A man from the post office made a show of peering at the window, but when Hamish asked if he'd seen anything, he only shrugged and said, "Dark night," as if darkness were a full excuse. Another woman said, "She's brought enough trouble. Maybe now she'll keep quiet." And she said it loudly, too loudly, then pinched her lips shut when Hamish turned. Lugs prowled along the edge of the garden, whining at the churned mud. Hamish knelt and saw tyre tracks, fresh and deep. Someone had stopped a car here, thrown the stone and driven off again. A sensible move for a coward. In daylight he could have measured them. In daylight he could have followed the line where the mud sprayed. But it was night, and the tracks blurred into the road, then vanished. Another detail slipping past him. He cursed under his breath. Loch Dhu was turning on itself, and he was always 2 steps behind. Back inside, Flora had pulled the blanket tighter, her face a pale smear under the lamp. She looked smaller than she had at the Kirk Hall, where she had strutted with that foolish pride. "Hamish," she whispered, "folk must ken the truth. Donny deserved to know. He did." "Whether he deserved it or not," Hamish said, "you should have left the letter alone." "I kept it safe. I copied it too, before the edges burned." She got up and hurried to the kitchen. Hamish followed, ducking under the hanging laundry that made the place feel even smaller. On the table lay her exercise book. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Here, I wrote down the good parts." The good parts. Hamish stared at the neat, even lines. Neater than her usual shaky handwriting. It looked almost rehearsed, but he was too busy trying to stop her crying to pay attention to what it meant. "You were certain enough to repeat it to half the village," he said. "It's true," she insisted. "The minister said the child lived by the loch. That's Donny." "It could be anyone." Her lips tightened. "You dinna listen, Hamish Macbeth. Never have." He resisted the urge to argue. The house smelled of damp wool and cold air and pity. 3 things he hated. The telephone rang again, jangling through the hall. Flora froze. Hamish answered it. Blair's voice exploded through the receiver. "What's this I hear about you pampering the local troublemaker? Folks say you're holding her hand instead of doing your job." Hamish closed his eyes. "A window was smashed. There's a threat." "Threat, my backside," Blair snarled. "She's getting what she deserves. Stirring folk up. Close it down. I don't want another minute wasted on her blethering." "She could be in danger." "So are half the idiots in Loch Dhu," Blair said. "If someone shuts her up for good, it'll save us the bother." Hamish felt a sharp jolt of anger. "Watch yourself." Blair laughed, a nasty, triumphant bark. "Write your wee notes and feel important, but the next time I hear Macbeth's coddling the gossip queen, I'll have you down here explaining why you're protecting her." He hung up. Hamish returned to the sitting room. Flora looked up at him with the trembling hope of someone expecting rescue. "It was Blair," Hamish said flatly. "He'll not be coming." She sagged in the blanket. "Folk want to punish me." "Aye," Hamish said before he softened it. "But they shouldn't." She blinked. "You believe me, then, about the letter?" Hamish hesitated. It was the wrong moment to correct her. "We'll see," he said, which wasn't yes and wasn't no, and left both of them unsatisfied. He helped her tape cardboard over the shattered pane, though it did nothing against the night's cold. Outside, the neighbours drifted away, already preparing new versions of the story to tell by morning. When Hamish finally stepped out into the lane, Lugs pressed against his leg, confused and unhappy. The dog could sense the village mood, the shifting hostility, the new silence forming around Flora Maclean. "Aye," Hamish murmured, "she's on her own now, and they'll say I'm on her side." Lugs whined once, as if agreeing. Hamish walked back toward the station, the night colder than before, and with every step the wrongness settled deeper. Protecting Flora had made him look partial. Missing the tyre clues had made him careless, and Loch Dhu, always eager for division, had chosen its next victim. He reached the road and paused, staring back at Flora's dim window with its crooked cardboard patch. This wasn't over. No part of it was over. Hamish knew the morning was starting badly when Lugs refused to leave the station doorway, pacing and whining as though something at the lock itself smelled wrong. After the broken window at Flora's, Hamish had hoped for a few hours without fresh stupidity. But Lochdu rarely obliged. He walked toward the shore anyway, muttering, "Come on then," and Lugs trotted beside him with the miserable air of a dog forced to revisit a place it disliked. The loch lay flat and grey, giving nothing away. Donny's boat had been pulled up on the shingle, where it rested like a scolded child put in a corner. In daylight, what he'd already noticed the first morning became impossible to ignore. The mooring rope was sliced, clean, deliberate. He'd even touched the cut yesterday and still let Blair bully him into calling it misadventure. A knife, not age. He lifted the end and felt the stiff, straight fibres. Someone had cut Donny loose. "Damn," he murmured. Lugs growled at the rope as if agreeing. Then there was the scrape on the side of the boat, fresh wood exposed in a strip that matched the angle of the jetty post. The boat hadn't drifted free. It had been shoved off with force. Hamish stood, rubbing his jaw. He'd let Blair bully him into calling it an accident, and now the evidence was mocking him for it. The worst part was that he couldn't even pretend he'd done a thorough job. He'd been sloppy, and Lochdu could not afford its constable being sloppy when murder might be hiding in plain sight. He walked back up the road to the station and rang Blair. The man answered as though he'd been waiting all morning to be annoyed. "What now?" Blair growled. "That boat rope was cut," Hamish said. "It's no accident." "You signed it as an accident," Blair snapped. "Changed your mind because some dog is whining at the shore?" Hamish bristled. "The facts don't sit right." Blair snorted. "Facts? Donny was drunk. Fell in. End. If you want it reopened, you bring me a suspect worth arresting. No fantasies. No village tales. Someone real." Hamish opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "I'll get back to you." "You do that," Blair said, and hung up. Hamish slammed the receiver down harder than needed. Lugs jumped and looked offended. "Sorry," Hamish muttered, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. He started with Tam Souter again, catching him outside the post office. Tam went pale at the sight of him. "I told you everything," he said. "We had 2 drams. He wasn't falling about." "You argue with him?" Hamish asked. "No. Why would I?" Tam's eyes flicked about. "Folk are saying all sorts now. I'm not wanting my name dragged through it." "Then tell me straight." Tam hesitated. It was polite, evasive hesitation, the kind Lochdu folk used when they wanted to keep their hands clean. "Nothing happened," he insisted. "We drank, we talked, we went home. Ask Patel." So Hamish did. Patel confirmed the men had left the shop steady enough. But, Patel added, Donny was twitchy, like someone who'd had words earlier with someone else. Don't ask me who. Hamish frowned. "You see him with anyone?" "Aye," Patel said reluctantly. "Come to think of it, he stepped outside once and spoke to a man in a car. I couldn't see well. It was dark, but the car wasn't local." Hamish's pulse quickened. "What kind of car?" "Dark," Patel said. "Could have been anything. Could have been no one. Forget I said anything." But Hamish didn't forget. The thought of a stranger hanging around Lochdu fit too neatly with the crofter's remark at the Kirk Hall about a man in a city overcoat. It was too easy a thread, too tempting not to pull. When he stopped a shy crofter named Ewan on the path by the kirk, the man looked startled to be questioned, but finally admitted, "Aye, I saw Donny last night, down by the jetty. He was talking to a man from a parked car. Big coat, city sort." "What were they saying?" Hamish asked. "I kept walking," Ewan said stiffly, meaning he'd loitered long enough to enjoy it, but not long enough to be useful. "Didn't hear anything." "Could it have been someone from Tommel Castle?" Hamish pressed. Ewan shook his head. "Not the Colonel's sort. Looked businesslike." Hamish felt a spark in his gut. Dangerous, alluring. A stranger with business. A solicitor's man, perhaps. Someone sent to handle the minister's old letter. Someone who might profit from Donny's claim, or lose something because of it. He latched onto the idea too quickly, but it was comforting. Easier to imagine a stranger pushing Donny's boat away in the dark than a neighbour doing it. Hamish left Ewan and walked back toward the station. He didn't want to fill out a proper report, he hated the neatness of it, so he pulled a scrap of paper from the drawer and sketched a messy timeline. Donny in the shop, Donny drinking, Donny talking to a stranger. Donnie dead the next morning, rope cut, boat shoved. The gaps stared at him like open mouths. Lugs lay at his feet, eyes following every move, uneasy again. Hamish tapped the pen and muttered, "It'll be someone from outside. Has to be." Because the alternative, that someone from Lochdu had shoved Donnie toward death, felt too close, too ugly, and too possible. He tried to think of who came and went from the village without attracting attention. The estate factor often travelled to Inverness and back, knew every croft, knew the laird's old business, a man used to handling unpleasant tasks. Hamish sat back. "It's him," he said aloud, though he had almost no evidence to support it. "It'll be the factor. Fits well enough." Lugs whined low and worried, as if sensing Hamish's leap over logic. Hamish ignored the dog's doubt. He stood and folded the scrap of paper into his pocket. He had a suspect now, even if the facts didn't yet agree. And Blair wanted a suspect. Hamish stepped out of the station, the loch air cold against his face, and felt the uneasy certainty of a man heading in the wrong direction, but heading fast. Hamish realised something was wrong the moment he stepped into the station and found Blair already there, planted in the only comfortable chair as if he'd sprouted from it. Lugs halted in the doorway, ears flat. Blair's presence felt like a draught, creeping into every corner. "Thought you were clever, did you?" Blair said, not bothering with a greeting. "Quiet inquiries, was it? About the estate factor?" Hamish froze. "I only asked a few folk where he was that night." "And they told me you were stirring up trouble again," Blair snapped. "So I brought the man here. He's in the back room now, raging like a bull. You can clean up that mess." Before Hamish could reply, Blair flung open the door to the tiny interview room. The estate factor, a thick-set man with a face red enough to match Hamish's hair, stood there with his arms folded. "This is an insult," the factor growled. "I've served the estate for 20 years, and now I'm dragged into this hovel because your constable fancies himself a detective." Hamish bristled but kept his voice mild. "I only asked where you were that night." "In Inverness," the man snapped, "buying fencing posts. Ask the agricultural shop." Blair stepped forward, delighted to perform. "You see, Macbeth, the factor was working. Meanwhile, you've been wasting time chasing shadows." Hamish felt the blood creep up his neck again. "There are questions worth asking." "Aye, but not by you," Blair said, and pulled a paper from his pocket with theatrical disgust. It was the accident report Hamish had signed, his own betrayal in black ink. Blair shook it at him. "Here's our village hero's official conclusion. Accident. All neat and tidy. And now he wants to change his tune, to show off." The factor sneered. "You signed it an accident and then sniff around me? Are you simple?" Hamish's face burned. There was no defence that didn't make him look foolish. "The facts changed," he muttered. Blair barked a laugh. "Facts changed, hear that? Macbeth sees ghosts in daylight." The factor slapped a folded invoice onto the desk. "There. Date, shop stamp, item list. Bought in Inverness that afternoon. Proof enough for anyone with sense." Hamish unfolded it. The date was right. The time, vague. A clue, but slippery. The man could have returned later that night. But Blair snatched the paper back before Hamish finished reading. "That's that," Blair announced. "We're done here. Sorry to trouble you," he added to the factor with a smirk that wasn't sorry at all. "Some constables don't know when to keep their noses out of grown men's business." The factor left without a glance at Hamish. Outside, villagers had already gathered, as though summoned by scent. They watched him march away with stiff dignity, muttering among themselves. Blair lingered in the doorway like a satisfied cat. "Look at them," he said. "They think you tried to ruin the man. Good luck fixing that." Hamish felt a dull throb behind his eyes. "I need more time." "You need a new job," Blair said. "Leave the thinking to Strathbane from now on." Before Hamish could reply, the station phone rang. Blair picked it up and handed it to him with a flourish. "For you. Someone important." It was Daviot. Even through the line, his voice sounded pinched. "Macbeth, I understand you are making inquiries into the laird's estate personnel." Hamish swallowed. "Just routine questions, sir." "Routine?" Daviot's tone sharpened. "The estate is sensitive. Any suggestion of scandal must be handled with care, and with paperwork, proper paperwork, no improvisation." The word alone was enough to make Hamish's stomach sink. "Yes, sir." I trust, Daviot added, that you will proceed cautiously, or not at all. He hung up. Hamish lowered the receiver and stared at it. Blair clucked his tongue. You heard the man. Stop poking about. Let professionals handle the big matters. You're not handling anything, Hamish muttered. I'm handling you, Blair replied. And that's enough. Then he strutted out, pleased with himself. The station felt even smaller when he was gone. Through the window, Hamish watched the villagers watching the factor stride away. Mrs. Kennedy was there, lips pursed as if she'd finally found the excuse she wanted. Aye, she said loudly to a neighbour. Hamish went after the wrong man, nearly ruined him. Another villager shook his head. He's protecting that Maclean woman. Everyone sees it. Hamish closed the curtain with more force than needed, but their voices still seeped in through the thin glass. The village mood was shifting, tightening around him like a knot. Lugs padded over, lying down at Hamish's feet and staring up with worried eyes. I know, Hamish said quietly. I've made a hash of it. He sat at the desk, the accident report still lying there like a wound that refused to heal. He should have stood firm with Blair. He should have checked the rope that first morning. Instead, he had let the story be shaped for him, and now it trapped him on every side. Outside, the villagers drifted away, already adjusting their stories for the next round of gossip. By morning, half of Lochdu would believe Hamish had tried to frame the factor out of spite. He rubbed Lugs's head, though it did nothing to ease the heaviness in his chest. The investigation wasn't just going poorly, it was twisting away from him entirely, and he had no idea how to pull it back. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment the telephone rang with that particular clipped stillness that only Priscilla managed. Lugs lifted his head, groaning as though he sensed trouble before Hamish even picked up the receiver. Hamish, Priscilla said, Father and I would like you to join us for dinner. This evening, we should discuss the situation calmly. Her voice was polite in the way frost is polite, beautiful, cold, and giving no choice. Hamish shut his eyes. A dinner? Yes, she said, at 8. She hung up without waiting for acceptance. Hamish sighed. Lugs gave him a look that said plainly he was a fool if he went, but Hamish put on his best shirt all the same. It never fit right. Tommel Castle had a way of making him feel like a badly trained dog brought indoors for show. The dining room was stiff with silverware and effort. The Colonel's glare alone could have sliced the roast. He barked some greeting that was not friendly, and gestured Hamish into a chair that seemed designed to make him sit straighter than he ever had in his life. We're only trying to keep things orderly, the Colonel boomed between mouthfuls. But if this village continues its ingratitude, one wonders why any decent family remains. Hamish murmured something indistinct. His eyes wandered to the door, half hoping a fire alarm might go off and save him. The hotel's visiting English couple, the Bensons, were also present, seated like decorative bowls at the far end of the table. Mr. Benson talked incessantly about the romance of Highland life, while Mrs. Benson nodded absently, as if agreeing only to keep things moving. Then she said, in a tone far too cheerful for the subject, "We've had such fun hearing all the local stories. Your cleaner at the hotel told me there was a letter proving all sorts of things. I asked to see it, but she laughed and said she'd tidied it into the fire." Hamish choked on his soup. "Tidied it? What?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Benson said, pleased to be helpful. "She said the village is full of secrets, but they're too much effort to keep. You must have your hands full, Constable." Priscilla closed her eyes in a slow, pained blink. The Colonel muttered something unrepeatable into his whiskey. Hamish felt his stomach drop. Mrs. Maclean had been telling tourists of all people, about the letter, and had even implied she'd burned it, which she nearly had, which made the whole village look feckless. He should have said something firm and sensible. Instead, he sat there feeling like the weakest piece of furniture in the room. Over coffee in the drawing room, Hamish made the mistake of trying to salvage some dignity. "Priscilla," he said quietly, "have you ever heard of any provision being made, for a child the laird might have had?" Her expression cooled further, if such a thing were possible. "My father would not confide such matters in me," she said. "No need to drag my daughter into this nonsense," the Colonel barked. "Enough. This subject is closed." Hamish nearly apologised for living. The evening continued like that. Awkward silences, the Colonel's complaints about village manners, and Hamish wishing for death by cutlery. When he finally escaped toward the door, Priscilla walked him out. She didn't speak, only gave him a small nod that was neither warm nor cold, simply distant enough to remind him that she belonged in the castle's bright windows and he belonged in a drafty police station. At the bottom of the steps, Hamish paused. The hotel manager, stepping out for some air, spotted him and gave a polite nod. "A busy night for you, Constable," he said. "All this talk around the hotel. Mrs. Maclean's been in and out more than usual. Days before the letter was found, she was in the staff room copying something from a bit of paper. Looked like a draft of a story, if you ask me." Hamish stiffened. "Copying from what?" "Oh, I didn't pry," the manager said lightly. "Just noticed. She seemed terribly pleased with herself." The man wandered off, humming. Hamish stood there under the castle lights, the mist edging over the lawn, feeling shabby and foolish. If Mrs. Maclean had been shaping her tale before she found the letter, then he'd been defending the wrong person from the start, and doing it loudly enough for the whole village to notice. Lugs pressed against his leg, warm and worried. "Aye," Hamish muttered. "We're in deeper than ever." He looked back at the castle window where Priscilla moved behind the curtain, a graceful silhouette in a world he'd never join. Then he turned for home, more unsettled than when he'd arrived. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he knocked on Mrs. Maclean's door and heard nothing. Not the usual bustling, not the clatter of her fussing about, not even her habitual sighing. Lugg stood beside him, tail low, as though he expected the house itself to scold them. Hamish knocked again, harder. At last the door opened a crack. Mrs. Maclean peered out, hair flattened on one side as though she'd slept in her chair. "Oh," she said, "it's yourself." "Aye," Hamish said. "Let me in." She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the lane, checking whether any neighbours were watching. Lochdu had long memories and short nerves. A constable at your door in daylight set tongues wagging faster than whiskey. She stepped aside. The house was warm with peat smoke, but something in it felt defensive, like a person holding their breath. Hamish walked straight to the kitchen table and sat down. Mrs. Maclean hovered by the stove. "I can make tea." "No," Hamish said. "Sit down." She did, folding her hands the way a schoolchild might when expecting a rebuke. "I want to see the exercise book," he said. "All of it. No more bits." Her mouth tightened. "It's private." "Not now," Hamish said, and though he kept his voice steady, he saw the effect of his tone. She looked at him as though he had shut a door she'd hoped would stay open. She rose slowly, went to a cupboard, and returned with the same battered school copybook he'd glimpsed once already. Its cover was soft from years of use, edges curling outward like claws. She handed it over with a reluctance that told its own story. Hamish opened it. The handwriting was neat, far too neat compared to the jagged scrawl on the half-burned letter he remembered from her biscuit tin. A full page was carefully headed with the old minister's name, the laird's title, a date. He read the lines once, then again, slower. "You've tidied this up," he said. She flushed. "Only to make it understandable. Folk like things clear." "This isn't what I saw that first day." She clasped her hands tighter. "I wrote it out properly. There's no harm in that." "There is," Hamish said bluntly, "when folk are fighting over every word." She blinked rapidly, her eyes shining in a way that was neither tears nor pride, something muddled and messy between the two. "Donnie deserved to know," she said. "I thought I was doing right." "You completed phrases," Hamish said, "things that weren't on the original letter." "Well, I remembered some bits, and the minister always wrote the same way. You can guess half of it. See the boy provided for, that sort of thing." Hamish felt his stomach sink. "So this isn't a copy. It's your version." "Not my version," she snapped, colour rising in her cheeks. "It's what should have been there. Common sense tells you so." "Common sense is not evidence," Hamish said. "You altered it." She looked genuinely offended. "I improved it. If the minister had been alive to rewrite it, he'd have thanked me." Hamish shut the book with a soft thud. For several seconds he didn't speak. She shifted nervously under the weight of his silence. "Where's the envelope?" he asked at last. "Oh," she said, "I threw that out ages ago." "No, you didn't," Hamish said, watching her face. "You remember it." "Aye," she said reluctantly. "It had a name on it. A solicitor's firm in Inverness. I recognised it. They wrote to the church sometimes." "What firm?" she told him. Hamish committed it to memory. "And the date?" he pressed. She swallowed. "Later than I first said. Later than I told folk, I mixed it up." "You didn't mix anything up," Hamish said. "You changed it to suit your story." She gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't think it mattered. If the minister meant to help the boy, what difference does it make when he wrote it?" "It matters," Hamish said, low and even, "because a man is dead, and you've given half this village the wrong idea." She looked away, cheeks blotched. "It's not my fault Donnie went drinking." "No," Hamish said, "but you stirred the pot until it boiled over." Her breath trembled. "You don't understand. Folk like Donnie, they never get their share. I was only trying to—" "I'm not asking why," Hamish cut in. "I'm asking what you changed and how much." Her eyes filled with a desperate stubbornness. "I was going to phone the solicitor, truly. I thought about it. But it seemed better to keep it local. Less fuss." Hamish felt the cold sinking deeper. She had shaped the entire letter herself, given the village a scandal with the confidence of someone who believed they were improving the facts. And he had defended her, loudly. He stood. Lugs rose at once, tail stiff with unease. "I'm taking the exercise book," Hamish said. "You can't," she said, half rising. "I can," he said, "and I am." She sat again, shoulders small and tight. "Will they arrest me?" Hamish shook his head. "Not yet." She flinched at the yet. He tucked the exercise book under his arm and stepped into the hall. At the door he hesitated. She was still at the table, staring down at her hands as though hoping the story she'd made would rewrite itself. Outside, the air felt raw. Lugs walked beside him without enthusiasm, ears drooping. Hamish didn't offer the usual dry remark. His thoughts were too sharp for words. He'd been shielding a woman who hadn't just twisted the truth, she'd rewritten it entirely, and the village was eating itself alive because of it. He kept walking, the exercise book heavy under his arm, the weight of his own mistakes heavier still. Tomorrow, he'd have to face Blair. Tonight, he wasn't sure he could face himself. Hamish knew the day was already wrong when the station phone rang before he'd finished his first cup of tea. Lugs, dozing by the stove, opened one eye and gave a soft groan, as though warning him not to answer. He picked up the receiver anyway. Daviot's voice came thin and tight. "Macbeth, the press are sniffing again. The laird is restless. You will go to Inverness today. There are old solicitor files concerning that minister. We need the paperwork tidy. Do you understand me? Tidy." Hamish closed his eyes. "Sir, I'm dealing with a murder investigation." "You will tidy the paperwork," Daviot repeated. "Blair is handling anything. Criminal." Then, in a lowered voice, "No more letters, Macbeth. No more surprises." He hung up. Hamish stared at the phone. Lugg sat up, ears pricked, sensing the shift from inconvenience to dread. "I ken," Hamish muttered. "It's all going the wrong way." He left Lugs with Mrs. Gallagher next door. The dog whined, pressing close, but Hamish steered him away gently. "I'll be back by evening. Behave." Lugg's expression suggested he doubted Hamish would manage the same. The bus to Inverness rattled like a dying kettle. Hamish hated city trips, the noise, the faces, the smell of offices, but Daviot's tone had left him no choice. By the time he reached the solicitor's building, a sour grey block smelling faintly of old carpet and unsolved tax disputes, his nerves were raw. Inside, a bored clerk looked up with the mild hostility of someone interrupted from doing nothing. "Minister's letters," the clerk repeated, unimpressed. "That'll be in archives." Hamish waited while the man shuffled off with all the urgency of a cow deciding whether to stand or sit. After a long 15 minutes, he returned with a battered cardboard file tied with string. Hamish took it carefully. If this held the truth, it had taken its time reaching him. He untied the string and opened the file on a cluttered desk. The first sheet stopped him cold. The original letter, unburned, unaltered, written in the old minister's shaky but legible hand. Hamish read it slowly. The minister asked the laird to consider a discreet lump sum arrangement regarding a child born many years earlier. The tone was cautious, almost apologetic. The letter stressed that the child lived far from the loch, in a town clinic, not Loch Dhu, not anywhere near Donny. Hamish felt a flush of anger, at Flora Maclean, at himself, at the village's endless appetite for drama. He read on. Another sheet mentioned a name he vaguely recognised. Someone who'd left Loch Dhu decades ago. The matter had been resolved quietly, the scandal buried, no heirs challenged, no crofts endangered. Donny had nothing to do with any of it. Flora Maclean's common sense had been more fiction than truth. He sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. The real story was simple and harmless, and entirely unrelated to Donny Kennedy. Yet Donny was dead, and Flora had built her own version so thoroughly that half of Lochdu had swallowed it whole. The clerk drifted past, glancing at the papers. "Nothing dramatic?" he asked, sounding disappointed. "No," Hamish said curtly, closing the file. "Nothing dramatic at all." He signed the necessary ledger, enduring the clerk's slow paperwork ritual, then took the bus back to Strathbane, folder clutched under his arm. Blair was waiting at the station like a wolf who'd scented a wound. "Well," Blair demanded, "did your wee adventure prove anything, or did you only waste the day?" Hamish handed him the top letter. Blair read 2 lines, snorted, and tossed it back. "All it proves is that you let daft women run your case. You let that Maclean creature tell you fairy tales." Hamish said nothing. Blair's triumph stung worse because it wasn't entirely wrong. Daviot summoned him next. The superintendent's office smelled of stale fear and polished wood. His face was pale, pinched. "Macbeth," he began, "the situation with the laird is delicate, very delicate. You must handle Lochdu with care." "I'll do what I can, sir." Daviot leaned forward. "No more letters, no more bodies, no more talk. Resolve this quietly and quickly before the papers find their next headline." He dismissed Hamish with a fluttering hand, as if brushing crumbs off a suit. Outside, Blair stood waiting, arms folded. "Daviot told you to keep your mouth shut, didn't he? Good advice, that." Hamish brushed past him. "I've work to do." "Aye," Blair called after him, "cleaning up your own mistakes." Hamish didn't turn. If he did, he might give Blair the satisfaction of a reaction. Back on the evening bus, the file felt heavier than it had in Inverness. Donny Kennedy had died because the village had believed a story that was never theirs. The real letter cleared Donny entirely, but clearing him now would not bring back his lungs, his breath, his name. It might not even calm the village. Folk liked the scandal too much. When he stepped off the bus in Lochdu, a few villagers stood near Patel's shop, whispering. They watched him the way people watch a fire they half expect to spread. Patel called out softly, "Hamish, any news?" "Maybe," Hamish said. "Maybe not." Patel didn't press. No one ever pressed when the truth risked disappointing them. Hamish walked the road back to the station. Lug's bark carried faintly from Mrs. Gallagher's garden, frantic and relieved. Hamish managed a thin smile. He swung by Mrs. Gallagher's at once, collected Lug's, and only then went back to the station. Inside the station, he laid the file on the desk and opened it one more time. The minister's words looked almost innocent now, like a small truth crushed under a much larger lie. "Well, lad," he said to Luggs, who had wriggled in beside him, "we've been barking up the wrong tree." Luggs whined softly, leaning close. Hamish rested a hand on the dog's head. The facts were clear. The village was not. Someone had shoved Donny's boat into the loch. Someone had cut the rope, and someone had used Flora's nonsense to cover their tracks. Hamish closed the file, the soft click of the cardboard sounding final. The truth was shifting again, and he could feel the next part of the story coming toward him like weather rolling off the hills. He only hoped he could get to it before Blair did. Hamish knew the evening had gone wrong the moment he opened the Kirkhall door and heard the low, buzzing murmur inside. He had not expected so many folk to come. He had hoped foolishly that only a handful would bother. But half of Lochdu sat waiting, stiff-backed on the hard wooden chairs, ready to judge him or each other, whichever came first. Luggs padded in beside him, tail low, sensing the tension. Someone in the front row muttered, "Should a dog be in here?" And someone else whispered, "He's better behaved than most." Hamish ignored them and walked to the front, 2 packets tucked under his arm, Flora Maclean's copied pages from her exercise book, and the solicitor's file from Inverness. His stomach felt hollow. If this went badly, it would be months before the village stopped muttering. If it went well, they would only mutter in a different direction. Mrs. Maclean sat near the back, hunched in her shawl, eyes red. She had chosen a seat beside no one. Even the kindly crofter's wife, who usually spoke to everyone, had taken a different row entirely. The estate factor, Alistair Kennedy, was near the aisle, arms folded, shoulders squared as if daring anyone to blame him for anything. Patel sat off to one side, polite expression fixed, though Hamish knew he disliked gatherings where tempers might fray. A few tourists had drifted in out of curiosity, nudged by hotel gossip. And Priscilla was there. She stood near the wall, elegant and unmoved, giving Hamish a faint nod that could have meant support or pity. Hamish cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I've something to set right." The room went very still. He held up the first envelope. "This is the copy made by Mrs. Maclean. Many of you heard about it. Some of you heard too much about it." A ripple passed through the crowd. Then he held up the second, thinner packet. "And this is the original letter from Inverness, the minister's real words." He opened Flora's copy first and read short lines, plain and unmistakable. Lines that suggested the late laird had a hidden child. Lines that would wound any family if true. Lines Flora had taken pains to make tidy and dramatic. He lowered the paper and opened the second envelope. The original letter sounded different as soon as he began. The handwriting was more formal. The tone cautious. It spoke of a child, yes, but a child living far away, nowhere near Loch Dhu. A matter dealt with quietly. A matter never connected to Donny Kennedy in any way. By the time Hamish finished the last clipped sentence, murmurs had begun. One man muttered, "So Donny had nothing to do with it." Another said, "We were daft to believe it." Flora stood suddenly, the shawl slipping from her shoulders. "I only wanted justice," she cried. "Folk kept secrets too long. I thought someone had to tell him." No one met her eyes. Hamish let the silence sit before he spoke again. Whoever pushed Donny's boat out knew he was upset by gossip that turned out to be false, and whoever cut the rope had to ken his habits, his moods, his movements, not some stranger in a city overcoat. He scanned the room. He didn't have to look long. Alistair stiffened, jaw tightening, his arms slowly uncrossed. Hamish continued, voice steady. Donny had spoken about making a new will, a will that would favour the cousin who had helped him before. He paused, watching. A private conversation by the jetty. Alistair's breath caught. "He wasn't going to change anything," the man burst out. He only said that because he was angry. Folks say all sorts when they've had a dram." The hall froze with one collective inhale. Hamish said quietly, "You knew what he said, though, at the jetty." Alistair's face went grey. "I only meant to scare him. He was talking madness, throwing away the croft, throwing away everything. I cut the rope, aye, but only to shake sense into him. I never meant him to fall in. He should have grabbed the side. He always managed before." Voices erupted. Outrage, disbelief, shame. The crofters shouted first, then the fisherfolk. Even the tourists leaned forward, wide-eyed, though they whispered as if enjoying a theatre production. Lugs barked once, sharp and accusing. Blair, who had slipped in late hoping to catch drama without effort, stepped forward with a smirk that made Hamish's teeth grind. "Right," Blair declared loudly. "I'll make the arrest. Police business. Step aside, Macbeth." Alistair stared at Hamish instead. "It Wisney murder," he said weakly. Just a mistake." Hamish didn't reply. The blunt facts were there. They didn't need embroidery. As Blair led Alistair out, puffed up like a rooster claiming credit for sunrise, the hall simmered with uneasy relief and resentment. Flora had sunk back into her chair, face buried in her shawl. Priscilla's eyes met Hamish's for a moment, not warm, not cruel, only distant, as though he were standing on a shoreline she would never cross. The villagers began to disperse in tight clusters, muttering privately, already forming the next wave of gossip. Hamish gathered the papers and slid them back into their envelopes. The hall felt colder now, as though something important had slipped through his fingers even while he held it. Outside, lugs pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Hamish stood for a long moment by the kirk steps, looking at the dark shapes of the houses, each window holding a story that had been wrong from the beginning. Nothing felt settled. Nothing ever did. Hamish began the morning knowing something was off. The air in Loch Dhu felt tight, as if the whole village had decided to hold its breath. Even Lugs trotted beside him with his ears half back, glancing at doorways as though expecting someone to step out and scold them both. When Hamish reached the station, Blair was already there, swaggering about as if he owned the place. "Took ye long enough," Blair said, loud enough for Mrs. Maclean's cousin lurking outside to hear. Daviot's pleased, told him a bit of firm questioning broke the cousin wide open. "Not your dithering." Hamish only nodded. Correcting Blair would change nothing and might make things worse. Blair strutted around a minute longer, basking in his own version of events, before marching out to escort Alistair to Strathbane. Alistair walked stiffly, face pale, avoiding every villager's eye. When the police car turned onto the road, several folk stared without shame, as though watching a parade they had ordered. Hamish stepped outside. Villagers were drifting past on invented errands. Some nodded at him, some did not. Mrs. Maclean came round the corner of the hall, clutching her shopping bag. For a moment she walked toward Patel's as if nothing had changed. Inside, however, the chatter stopped at once. She froze on the threshold. A crofter's wife looked straight through her as if she were already a ghost. Someone else muttered, "Aye." Alistair cut the rope, but she handed him the knife. No one said it quietly. Mrs. Maclean backed out without buying a thing. Hamish followed her down the lane, though she didn't want company. "Flora," he said, keeping his voice flat, "you need anything from the shop?" "No." She didn't look up. "Folk have decided what I am." "That's not for them to say," Hamish replied, though even he knew it sounded weak. She gave a short laugh that wasn't amused. "Och, but they will say it anyway." Then she walked on, shawl pulled tight, shoulders small and sharp. A few minutes later, Priscilla stepped out from beside the post office. She had the look of someone who had been waiting exactly as long as she intended, no more. Her coat was neat, her hair immaculate, and her expression unreadable. "You checked the facts," she said. "In the end," Hamish nodded. "Aye." "But you were slow, Hamish." He had no answer. He stood there, tall and awkward, hands shoved in his pockets like a schoolboy caught out. She waited for something more, perhaps an apology, perhaps a defence, but he gave neither. After a moment she turned away, giving him a polite nod that felt colder than any insult. Patel appeared in his doorway then, folding a cardboard box. "Constable," he said quietly, "I'll be putting aside broken biscuits for Mrs. Maclean. Folk forget she's still to eat." Hamish gave him a brief look. It wasn't thanks. It wasn't approval. Merely acknowledgement. Patel nodded back, as if satisfied. Inside the shop, voices rose again, muted now, careful. The free-flowing talk that had stirred all this trouble had dried up, at least for today. Folk weighed every word, as though the wrong one might drag them into the mess they had enjoyed from a safe distance. Hamish walked on. Lugs followed close, nose brushing Hamish's leg from time to time. At the end of the street, the police car reappeared, Blair leaning out the window to fling one last sneer. "Village heroes," he shouted, "always making a mess the rest of us have to clean." Hamish didn't rise to it. Blair would invent his own story regardless. Later, back in the station, the phone rang. Daviot's voice came through, stiff and thin. "Well done, Macbeth. Though next time," he added, "I suggest handling letters before the press becomes involved. Appearances matter." "Aye," Hamish said, "they do." He hung up and stared at the quiet room. The station felt heavier than usual, full of the things no one said out loud. Lug settled at Hamish's feet with a low sigh. Outside, Lochdu went on punishing Flora in small, private ways. No law against it, no law to stop it. Hamish rubbed his brow. They talked about letters, but letters had never been the real trouble. It was mouths, and they were not likely to stay shut for long. Something was wrong with the fire. Hamish saw it at once. The peat in the grate had burned down to a faint glow, though he had banked it carefully before supper. Lug stood in front of it, tail low, giving the embers a doubtful look, as though even the dog felt the day was not finished with them. Hamish set another sod on the glow and watched it catch slowly. The room stayed cold. On the table beside him sat the thin file of Donny's case, hardly thicker than a grocery list. A man drowned, a cousin arrested, a village turned inside out, and all of it fitted neatly between two flimsy cardboard covers. That was wrong as well, and he stared at it a long moment before picking up his pen. He wrote his final report with blunt, workmanlike strokes. No flourishes, no long arguments, just the facts as they stood, and the awkward gaps left in between. When he was done, the page looked embarrassed to be part of official business. He felt much the same. Lugs gave a snore that rattled the table leg. "Aye," Hamish said, "you've the right idea." He pushed himself up, tugged his coat on, and stepped outside. The evening had the heavy damp that settled often on Lochdu after too many troubled days. Mrs. Maclean came along the opposite pavement, carrying a basket that did not look heavy but dragged at her all the same. She saw him. For a second she looked ready to cross the street or turn back, but instead she gave a small nod, the sort folk give when they aren't sure whether they're welcome. Hamish returned the nod. Nothing more. She walked on, head down. He watched her disappear past the post office. People had stopped staring at her openly, but the way they stepped aside for her was worse. Inside the station, a figure stood waiting. Priscilla. She looked even more out of place than usual against the chipped paint and battered filing cabinets. "My parents will not pursue any action over the letter," she said. "It is better forgotten." "Folk will not forget," Hamish said. He hadn't meant it as a challenge. It sounded like one anyway. Priscilla studied him, cool and restrained as ever. "You did your duty," she said at last. There was no warmth in it, no hint of approval. She might have been commenting on the weather. She hesitated, as if searching for a lighter remark, but none came. Instead, she inclined her head and left, footsteps neat on the path. Hamish stood there a moment after she was gone. Some men would have been crushed by that kind of distance. He only felt tired. He whistled for lugs and headed down toward the loch. The path was muddy but passable. The jetty had been repaired by the crofters who claimed they wanted the matter put to bed, though they still talked about it behind every door. The water lay flat, barely stirring. Luggs sniffed the planks with a puzzled frown, as though remembering the frantic morning when Donny's boat bumped against them. Hamish felt that memory in his bones. "Folk enjoyed the tale too much," he muttered. Nobody checked whether it was true. Luggs gave a soft whine that might have been agreement or just the cold. "They'll talk less for a while," Hamish went on, "but they'll start again. They always do." He didn't say it bitterly. It was simply a fact, like rain or the price of petrol. They walked back slowly. The lights of Loch Dhu glimmered through the mist in that uneven, familiar way. Nothing in the village had really settled. It had only quieted itself long enough to gather breath. At the station door, Luggs shook himself and trotted inside. Hamish followed, looking once more at the untidy desk, the scattered papers, the burned-down fire. He hoped, without much optimism and with no certainty at all, that next time gossip came crawling, he might be quicker to stamp on it. But he knew Loch Dhu, and he knew himself. Some things were never said aloud, others were said far too often. He shut the door behind him.